Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler. After several decades of creating music in a manner that was beginning to feel routine, guitarist Miles Okazaki was searching for a fresh way to make music. He examined the processes of artists Ed Ruscha, Lewitt, and Ken Price as templates for creating. In possession of these new ideas gleaned from these artists, he went into the studio with a group of musicians that were given prompts which were recorded and formed into what Miles refers to as musical slabs. These slabs were then sanded, polished, and sculpted, and the result is Miniture America, which Okazaki describes as a sonic treasure hunt, a collection of 22 vignettes exploring the wonder of chance encounters and found compositions. Miles, welcome to Liner Notes. Appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me, speak with us, and share about your new recording, Miniture America, which is out July 19. Good to meet you, man. And I first want to just jump in with the music, which I listened to and, completely entranced by it. Cool stuff. But after I read about the process, I had a completely different experience of, what the recording was after knowing what was, part of the process that went behind it. So I want to start there. You have extra musical things that influence this. And I want to start with the road trip that you took with your son and maybe the dog. It sounded like you were up against a wall. You've been doing music for a long time and you wanted something else. And the thing I want to tap into is you talk about being behind the wheel and looking at landscapes to get your gears going. Why don't you share with us a little bit about what that means to you and how that affected your creative process?
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, David.
Yeah. It was a long first question, bro. Sorry, man.
let me try to unpack that. So I'm curious to ask you, what is the difference in your experience, but maybe that's for later. Fundamentally, I'm most interested in what is the listening experience. How does the sound turn out? Now, if the process is, interesting, that's cool as well. But the process is just the way to get to that result somehow. And I don't know. I guess I have the idea that if I take a different process, maybe I'll get a sound that I wasn't expecting or hadn't done before, right? That's all. I think that's all pretty obvious. But sometimes it escapes us. We just keep making records that are sort of, with certain assumptions in place about how a record is made, right? So in terms of, the very broad stroke of wanting to do a sort of a different type of project, it's tied into what I've done up to that point, right? So my major projects up to that point were kind of in chunks of these sort of groups of records. So I did this 3-record series called Mirror Generations and Figurations. That was from like 2006 to 2013 or so. And that was pretty, traditional writing for a small group. Pretty involved compositions, very rhythmically involved. And then I moved on to this other group called Trickster. When I started making some records for that, we did 4 records with them and wrote a body of music for that group, which was more of kind of almost like a funk band. And then I had another project where I was working on Thelonious Monk's music, and that was a big thing for me. So, that's just to sort of paint the picture of where my headspace is at, a couple of years ago when I started thinking of this record. And driving, the quietness of the mind is a hard thing to achieve nowadays, you've been watching the news, right? It's hard to get these things out. It's hard to just find the space to let your mind sort of make connections and synthesize information and come up with an idea, I think the mind is very good at being creative if it's not full of stuff, you know. That's the way I feel about it anyway. I feel like if it's really cluttered, it's hard to get around, you know. So yeah, external stimuli can kind of mirror the internal mind, you know. So being out in a big open space can make you feel like you have more space in your mind. For example, being in a cluttered, being in the middle of a crowd can make you feel, you know, like you can't do anything. That's for me anyway. I prefer the big open spaces than the crowds. But so anyway, yeah, a road trip is a sort of a long meditation, you know. And if you're not trying to distract yourself the whole time with entertainment, then your mind goes to those other places, you know. And that's the place where I remember when I was a kid and we didn't have all this stuff to sort of distract you all the time. You just had to kind of look out the window and kind of explore your thoughts and deal with boredom, you know. And boredom is, I think, quite a positive experience, you know, because it forces you to work with some kind of limitations and see what's there, see what you actually have in your mind. So that's the starting place, a blank slate, you know.
All right. And then there are 3 artists that you kind of drew upon, if I'm understanding this correctly. The first one is Ed Ruscha and his artwork, which is inspired you, and this is the title of the recording. And then there is, again, 3 people I didn't know until I did a little investigation after reading your notes, but Saul Lewitt, and whose drawings, and I thought this was interesting, maybe clarify this, but it sounded like he had an idea about starting something and then like maybe setting the playing field, letting it go, and then inviting other people to contribute to it, which is kind of cool. And yeah, I think probably as a musician, as a composer, that takes a lot of courage to relinquish that control, or maybe as any kind of artist. And then the last one is sculptor Ken Price, and that you kind of elaborate on how you maybe mirrored his process musically. So if you can and care to speak about those 3 and how that influenced your writing, your playing, and your concept.
All right. Well, I'll try to be brief and not too much inside baseball. So
I'll go for it, man. I mean, that's this isn't going to be on Netflix, so.
Oh, really? Wait. Okay, so I grew up with visual artists, my mom, my dad. So I always, even before guitar, I was really into visual arts. That was my main thing, And I still attempt to do it, although my chops are so kind of, raggedy that it takes, like I used to draw all my own album covers and stuff, but it would take a very long time and to get kind of my technique up to the point where I thought it was acceptable, after not doing anything for a long time, just like anything, sports or whatever, you got to get back in shape, right? So at a certain point, I kind of stopped doing that because it was intrusive to my time. But, I started using some of my mother's artwork for album covers. I did some things with origami that was having to do with this trickster idea. And that's one of the things where I find it's pretty fruitful to go to for an idea about process, outside of music, as you said in the beginning, extra musical, So how do you get outside of the box that you're in? You can just kind of go to a different box and take some stuff from there. So, I think plenty of people do that. They, reading a novel or dealing with some kind of social issue or dealing with some personal investigation or something like that. I like to do it kind of literally, not just like this album is about this landscape that I was looking at and it makes me feel that way, but more like what's the actual process going on in making some artwork. So I'm not trying to make something that sounds like something else looks. Do you know what I'm saying? So like I'm trying to get an idea about process that could be a sort of a analog to music from some sort of creation of a visual object, Saul Lewitt is someone I've been aware of for a long time, very famous minimalist artist. And if you go to the DMB kind of something, you'll see some of his work up there. And yeah, there was one drawing that struck me many years ago that was a wall drawing. And where it's just instructions, really. He didn't make the drawing. It's other people that make it. He has the instructions, and the instructions are, well, just make these, somebody draws a line with a pencil from the bottom of the wall up to as high as they can reach, and as you get higher, it gets kind of wavy and it gets hard to reach, then it kind of fades out at the end there as you reach the top of your thing. And let's say you had, I don't know, 20 different people doing that, you would have this kind of cycle of heights that would kind of make some kind of wave, there would kind of be kind of a repeating thing, but then, if the instructions, depending on what the instructions are, you get different results. So I think in that one, the instructions were, well, the next person has to draw a line, kind of close to the previous line. And if there's a kind of a irregularity in that line, you can just exaggerate it or whatever, kind of follow that. And then, of course, that creates these undulations in the lines, and just don't cross the line. Just stay close to it, but don't cross it. And that's the only thing, And then at the end, you have this really, cool looking thing that is going to be different every time you do it, right? Depending on, the skill levels of the drafters that are doing it, and the heights of the people, and the sort of stochastic nature of those errors and things like that. So I liked that as a compositional idea. I didn't really have any application for it, but I just sort of had it in mind, maybe I could do something like that at some point when I'm not so concerned with making a composition that then other people play. That's usually like what I've done in the past. Here's my tune, and I want you to play it the way that I wrote it, or else, or when you get to a higher, like that's sort of the student level thing, and then you get to a higher level and you're getting great musicians, great improvisers, and you're like, okay, use this as a kind of a guide for what you want to do, but don't play the same thing every time, obviously, right? You use this as a starting point, and then you do your thing. And then I was thinking, well, at this point, maybe I don't even really need to have a lot of this written stuff. It's more like, because I'm dealing with musicians who are going to come up with things that are hipper than what I write, So I can just try to come up with ideas, Now, I wasn't able to totally let go of that for this record. I did have some written things, so it's hard. It's hard to let go. But yeah, that was one thing. And then, I'm sorry, this is a long answer, as I said. Usually, I'm interested in this abstract art. I'm also interested in figurative art and whatever, all kinds of things, anything that involves something visually compelling. But I was asking David Bixler, who's a producer of this album along with me, who's really involved in the art world in many. He just knows a lot more than I do about the history of art and especially 20th century abstract and minimalist art. And so he was like, well, why don't you check out this guy and this guy and this lady and this, who are like all these different artists. So I was checking these out, and there's one piece that I was attracted to by Ken Price, and Ken Price is a California artist who I didn't know before, but it has these kind of very hard to describe, but kind of like bulbous, like sculptures. They look like kind of blobs, but they're kind of evocative. Some of them are kind of like voluptuous looking. Some of them are kind of silly looking. Some of them, I don't know how you can say it has a certain type of humor, but there's a certain type of humor in the way that they're formed. But the result is this really, you should just go look at a picture of something it has, but the surfaces of them are these just really crazy patterns of colors. And it's not a pattern like a repeating pattern, but it's like a landscape, like something you might see in when you mix up a bunch of different colors of oils or something, and they all kind of randomly make these highly contrasting things. And the way that was done was through many, many layers of paint put onto a thing, and then sanding away at that paint in order to expose different colors and different things underneath, sanded kind of unevenly, so that it's not, you don't just sand off one layer, but you might sand through like 7 layers in one spot and 5 layers in another. So all these different colors coming out because of this process, right? Now, of course, this isn't any kind of new process. People take a block of marble and carve away at it and get a Greek statue or whatever. But I like the idea that each of these layers had different content in it, So I thought that could be an interesting studio process. So we could record layered music, and I could kind of sand away at it, at home. So that's what I did for a whole bunch of stuff on this record. We recorded, everyone playing at once, based on some of these instruction type of things. I say, long notes or jumping around kind of stuff, or certain scales, or certain, all kinds of stuff. And then I have this sort of unintelligible block of sound, that's what it sounded like in the studio, and of course the people there are like, oh, I hope you do something interesting with this. I mean, they didn't say that, but I'm just probably thinking that.
You can see it in their eyes, man.
Like, this is really pretty dense, But yeah, I took that home, and I had everyone isolated, of course, in booths. East Side Sound, where we recorded this, has 8 different isolation booths, so you can really get a lot. I have a lot of control in post, And I took them home, and I did various things to them. And the main one being like cutting it down to just one melody. Like, I would just let me start this track, and I'm just going to listen for the one I like the most at the beginning, and then follow that, melody till it ends. Part of the instruction would usually be like, take a breath or a little break after your phrase and then start a new one. So I would have a way to get from one thing to another, So maybe it starts on the flute, and then, I hear, okay, at the end of that flute phrase, oh, the voice is doing something interesting. I'll go to the voice. And then, at the end of that phrase, maybe I'll go to the piano, so that I could build one continuous line that goes all the way through the whole thing. So if it was 9 musicians playing, I'd just keep one and I erase 8 of them. Okay. And so I have a through line. It's sort of like just a weird long melody that's switching instruments. And then I could transcribe that as a composition, as a kind of found composition. And then I could learn that on the guitar, and then I could overdub the guitar playing along with this thing.
That's super cool. And, I guess that's part of like why I say my experience was different, because that gives me some insight. Because one of the things I grabbed onto right away was the tune "Look Out Below." And I thought, oh man, that's like kind of like a Hocket of some way, but like, like super cool. But so what you're saying is you put this thing together and then you overdub maybe yourself on top of it as the instruments fell off and came together.
Yeah, well, it's a sound that I had in mind, which is sort of like composed things that might be kind of impossible to compose, really. Like, so if, let's say I had written that out and then I brought it into the studio or sent it to people and was like, okay, Patty, from 1 second to 3 seconds you play, and then switch to, and then everybody's trying to, you'd probably have to record it phrase by phrase, and there would be people trying to get it right. And like,
yeah,
no, I don't have to do it that way. I could do it backwards. So I give the instructions, which gives a certain character to the thing. I have great improvisers, and the improvisers will be improvising, and then I'll learn improvisations and choose them in such a way that it seems to make a composition sonically, and then I'll do the work of trying to match it, which I don't mind doing the work, but I don't want other people to do that kind of thing. That's too much to ask. So, this is sort of a backwards thing. When you hear it, you might be like, oh, wow, this is really, must have taken them a long time to rehearse this or something like that. There's no rehearsal.
So you went into the studio without, this was the first time they looked at your instructions and thought about this concept.
Yeah, I didn't want anyone to have any preparation. Yeah, the first thought, best thought,
Fair.
Yeah.
So was your playing minimal, like your involvement as a guitarist minimal in the actual session?
Well, no, I was playing quite a bit, and sometimes I played a scratch track that was then erased, that's another technique, And other times I played stuff live. I mean, there's quite a few tracks on there where it's just live performance. Like there's a duet with me and Faye Victor. That's the first time me and Faye ever played together. And that's just live in the studio. You know, there's some stuff mixed in there because I don't want it all to be the same sort of meticulously crafted thing. I want some of it to be ambiguously crafted, you know.
Right. Yeah, a couple other things. What, from where you started, you know, like after you went home with the stuff and, you know, started sculpting your sanding process, like how much time was involved in that?
Oh, it's hard to say. Again, I try to go with intuition, you know. So as I'm choosing things, you know, I had Alex Levine, a guitarist here in New York, was helping me out with the file management, you know, so which is kind of a lot, you know. I said, Alex, can you just take these files out? Every time somebody takes a breath or a break, just give me split the region there, you know, meaning like you kind of break the track there so that I can have all these little blocks that look like little Lego blocks or something, you know. I can just kind of go from one to the other, highlight, so that I can move quickly through it, so that I can hear a sort of composition developing. Otherwise, if I have to do that, then it's a lot of sort of clicking and computer work in the middle of trying to sort of do a musical thing, which to me is very difficult, you know. So I just get the materials ready and kind of a mise en place, you know, and then you go to it, get the composition, and then, you know, a little while to learn it depending on how difficult it is. But I could do, you know, I mean, it might have taken me a few hours to do one of those tracks, you know. I mean, a few hours to get it recorded, you know. The process of transcribing and learning it is a little longer, you know.
Right.
But it depends really on how technically demanding it is. Some of it quite technically demanding, you know. There's some stuff that like Patricia Brennan would play on vibes. It's like really almost impossible on guitar, you know. So I would have to do many takes to kind of get it right.
All right. There's 22 tracks on this recording. Was that the intention when you went in? Did you have 22, you know, compositions or cue cards, whatever you were using?
I had way more. I had some like 60 things or something like that. Yeah, because each one of these things, I'd be okay. Now do it, because we didn't have to rehearse or get it really like right. You know, we weren't like, oh, we almost got it, let's do another one. It was like every one of them was pretty much good. You know, it was sort of like in terms of the raw materials. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so I say, okay, let's do that one. Now we'll make this adjustment. You know, let's try it this way and try it that way. And then so I had to make a lot of decisions. In terms of paring it down to, I don't like to make long records really. I like to keep them around 40 minutes or something. This one's actually a long one for me. I think it's around 50 minutes, you know.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, like I came of age, you know, like Blue Note Records. It was perfect for my attention span, like one side of an LP. So I hear that. Curious, like with what you set out for conceptually and what you ended up with. Are you surprised? Were there times when you predicted that or times when you were blown away by where it went?
I think it remains to be seen. You know, I'm curious what people, I'm always interested in audience, like how things sound to people. Because for me, once I have gone through this process, I've heard something so many times that you can't really hear it anymore. You know, I think that, you know, you don't have fresh ears anymore. And I mean, I sent the record to the people on the record, you know, and they seem to dig it. But it's not what I imagined, but nothing ever is, you know. I don't really I'm not trying to get to something that I already know. I'm trying to get to something unknown, you know. And it doesn't have to be an entirely new process. I could be playing a monk tune and I would get to that same place, you know. It's just that when it's embedded in a certain style or a certain repertoire or a certain way of playing, or, all these things that are habits and assumptions and conventions, it's a little harder to get to something new personally, So my idea was simply, let me just do a different process and see what comes out. I did have something in mind that was like, maybe it will sound, it will have a certain type of vibe. I guess that's as close as I can get, a vibe,
Yeah. So does this band, is it going to play live? Can this happen live? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think no and no. Although I could do some version, but there are logistical things involved, which is getting all these people together calendar-wise is kind of impossible. It's kind of an all-star type of situation, So just to get the studio date, you plan quite far in advance, and that's, stars aligning a certain way. It takes quite a while. So, but there could be a version of it. But the other problem is that I don't have material. The material has come out of, it's a studio creation, right? So there are a few things. The main themes of the record are written, but that can't really sustain a whole live performance. Those are things that come and go as a sort of concrete, melodic and harmonic signatures of the record, right? They aren't meant to be played over and over again for a whole concert. They're sort of like the narrator of a story or something. Comes in a little bit, sets the scene. Okay, now we go off this way and we go off that way. I could certainly imagine a version of it live that's a little different from the record. It wouldn't be so synchronized sounding. It would be more about the vibe. But now that the vibe has been created, you can listen to the record and try to capture that vibe in a live performance. That's sort of a dialectical process that happens. You come up with something, and that actually teaches you that thing is possible, and you can do that thing. And then you do something else, and you improvise. And you improvise something that you never could have concocted intellectually. And then you record that thing, that's on a recording, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe that's a thing that I could do. Figure out what was it that happened there? What was it that this other person did? And let's try to incorporate that into the language. And that's sort of a way of expanding personal language, I think. So yeah, it is possible. I've been thinking about it. I have nothing on the books.
Okay. Before I let you go, last thing I want to delve into is the spoken word on the recording and the use of poems, and kind of a cool process about the final lines. But what prompted this? What caused you to do this, and what was the process of putting that together? Because it's kind of random.
I guess I don't talk about this much, but I was actually an English major, and I wanted to be some kind of poet or novelist or something. It turned out I didn't have any talent in that area, but I still appreciate the craft of writing, quite a bit, and the effect of words. Words are this is what we use every day to communicate. So they have a lot of power, And on this record, I was like, well, I don't have bass and drums. Every record I've done, except for solo guitar, has some bass and drums on it. In fact, it's the main thing that I'm focused on. It's the bass and the drums, the rhythm aspect. And these instructions that I had given, they create a lot of textures and a lot of melodic things, but not a lot of rhythms in a way, the rhythms that are kind of repeatable. So like you might play a phrase, but the rhythm's not going to really come back again, in the process that I was describing. So I was like, well, how can I make something that's kind of rhythmic, but not like metric? I'd say like most of the things I've done in the past are kind of grid oriented, metrically, like, okay, this person plays this and this person plays this, and we line up and we meet at this spot, and it's kind of works out in some kind of cool way, That's fine. That's math. That's locked in, everybody's locked in to the same thing. I wanted to have something here that was maybe off grid in terms of like, well, by the grid, I mean something like a metronome or a beat. So there's no master beat. There's no like dictator at the top saying, well, this is where the beat is. Everyone has their own beat, which is more like life. Everyone has their own heartbeat. We're all doing different stuff. But we hang out and have conversations, So in some way we're kind of connected, but we're not, unless somebody's really holding court or mansplaining or whatever, you don't have like one person that's like saying, okay, this is what we're going to talk about and this is the way you're going to say it and all that stuff. And I part of that thing I was describing earlier is about letting go of this role of the composer as a sort of like top of some kind of chain of command or something like that. I like to be more in the middle somewhere, generally. So this is all to say, how can you make some rhythms like this? I was like, well, language has great rhythms. I mean, a lot, when we're playing, we're trying to imitate the rhythms of speech quite a bit, especially when you're playing a song with lyrics and you're thinking of the lyrics while you're playing or something like that. Or like Charlie Parker would say, I'm trying to imitate the rhythms of speech and all that stuff. So that I think is kind of a principle I've always thought of when I'm playing. I'm kind of like talking, but non-verbally, And so I was, again, with David Bixler, I was trying to come up with some words. I just wanted people to say some stuff that I could play off the rhythms of what they were saying, and how could that work? You could just have someone reading something and then you just play the rhythms of what they play or how they say it. People do that on YouTube and stuff all the time. There's a famous speech and here's somebody playing along with it, and it's a cool trick. But that's not really what I want. I wanted something with layers in it, kind of polyrhythms, and so, well, on some stuff I took some text and I kind of redacted it. There's one where Faye Victor's singing, that duet that I was talking about before, she's singing some stuff from Immanuel Kant, like a Critique of Pure Reason. I took it, I kind of redacted it so it didn't make sense anymore, and she's reading those words. That was one thing, and I was like, well, it doesn't really work for a group. I don't want everybody doing that synchronized. It's not going to sound natural. So I just, Breskin had this idea of just taking the final lines of poems, because I was trying whole poems. I was like, oh, let me do this whole poem. I like this poem. But it was too much like lyrics or something like this, too much like together, like you would follow the poem. You'd try to follow the poem, and that would take away from the musical effect. So he had the idea, well, why don't you just take the final lines of different poems? So I did that. I had a poetry collection in my house, and I was like, okay, let me just pick some poems I like and the final lines of them. I made a list of a bunch of ending lines of poems. And then put those together as a new poem. So those are kind of like poems that are made from the ends of other poems, And I said, okay, everybody's, all right, this is another long answer. I don't know how else to do it, but I say, okay, everybody's going to get this sheet. They have these 5 or 6 lines of to say, and you just read through it, and you kind of whisper it, or say it in a very low voice. But you're going to accent one of the lines, You're going to, but the wind pours down, and the wind pours down, and every time you come to that line, you accent it. You say it full volume, and the rest of it is. So what would happen is if everybody's doing that, that one line will be jumping out. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And it'll be the same kind of rhythm because it's the same words. Everybody will be saying, but the show is over, but the show is over. And that has and that'll be a rhythm that I can play off of. But I won't be determining where that rhythm happens, when that rhythm happens, or like how fast it is, or where the accent is, or whatever. There'll be a great variety of rhythms that have that as a kind of underlying structure.
Wind pours down.